So hello, Ken, and
Hello.
thank you very much for this new encounter with me,
You
which
bet.
I am doing in representation of all your followers.
Ah, well, that's great.
Speaking
That's
in
great.
modern terms, because right now, the followers online. So in representation of all of them, here we are.
Right.
And they are keen to listen to you and receive more of your wisdom and charisma. How are
Oh,
you, my dear friend? How are you?
I'm doing just fine. Thank you.
I'm glad to hear that. I'm very glad. I see you well, so you have to be well because you really look well.
Yes. Well, thank you. That's
So
nice.
it's true. Before we start with questions gathered, as you very well know, among integralists from all over the world, I want to state the fact that we are here today celebrating this 14th of February, in which we cherish and honor love in many countries. And I want to state this because, Ken, I do love you. I am a great admirer of this man, not only as a person in his generosity and kindness, in intelligence and dedication to his own personal and transpersonal development, but also I admire his extensive work that has been profusely offering to the world even before the creation of his integral theory. So in
Wow.
it's
Thank you.
true. It's
Yeah.
it's very very important. So he's more than 30 books published and translated to many languages about philosophy and mysticism and sociology, politics, ecology, and spiritual evolution have made many people fall in love with him. Me being your number one fan, as I read most of your work and I'm passionate about it.
Yeah.
So thanks again, Ken, for being here today with us in this special day and for all you have shared and that integrates so well and with so much consciousness and elegance our fragmented world. So
Ah,
let's begin with the first question. Are you
okay.
ready?
Sure.
So, what do you think about artificial intelligence doing art and replacing artists?
Yeah. Well, I don't think um, it's ever gonna actually and fully replace art. Um, if you look at the stuff that AI is creating, the various artistic works that they're creating, some of it is impressive. I mean, it's clearly got a perspective, and it's clearly been programmed very well, and so it can reproduce certain types of imagery and experiential data that would normally take a human being to create. Um, but there's still something happens to me when I look at a piece of art and know that it's a result of AI. In other words, it just doesn't somehow feel the same as looking at a real human artist's work. Um, so I think that's a real problem, because I think when people get in their minds an idea that they're looking at a work of artificial intelligence and not a real human being, that it's going to start to have an effect on them as well. And I don't think it'll be a positive effect. I think it'll be more like the effect it has on me, that I just know that this is an artificial intelligence production. And so I look at it that way. And therefore, it just doesn't have a very positive impact on me, because I know that it's been artificially created, and there's actually just an extensive programming system going on, and it just doesn't interest me.
It's like it's missing the human factor, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's exactly what the problem is. And so that actually has quite a change in my own consciousness when I look at it. It's, in a word, it's just not as impressive.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's a certain type of impressiveness that comes from the fact that artificial intelligence machine can create works of art that are very realistic and very well done. And that's fine. I mean, I'm impressed by that part of it. But then the more I simply look at it and think that this is being done by an artificial machine, then the less impressed I become by it. And I think that's just a part of the interpretation that the human brain tends to make. And notice, no artificial intelligence would think that about itself. So, in other words, there's no human feeling coming from that artificial intelligence. It's not going to look at some painting that another artificial intelligence did and say, wow, that looks great. It's just not going to have that sensation going through it. Or it's not going to say, well, that's just the product of an artificial intelligence creation and programming, and I'm not that impressed by it. It would never have that kind of expression of its own work.
We will need to see maybe some experiments about people that would look at these paintings or sculptures or any other type of art that people do not know that are created through
Right.
artificial intelligence, and see what they feel.
Right.
I would love to see an experiment made like so, because
Right.
it will be very interesting to see what you say, which is, are they missing the soul there?
Right.
Because that's, very interesting
Right.
to see.
And part of the experiment would be, first of all, to just show them the artwork. And then after they've come to their decision, tell them it's made by an artificial intelligence machine, and see if it changes anything about what they feel about it. Because that's what I sense will happen.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Let's see. Let's tell Roger to make an experiment at the university with that. That will be very
Sure.
interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So very nice. So is there, do you think, a method of evaluating the development of consciousness in a person, that in which level may a person be?
Well, yes, almost every major modern or postmodern developmentalist, after they develop their model, or during the fact that they're actually developing their model, they create tests that they can give people that will tell them what level of development, according to their model, the person taking the test is. And there are probably 15 or so of those tests out there. So there's a Kohlberg test, the Jane Levenger test, the Piaget test, and all of them are very accurate measurements of the level of development that a person is at. So those are actually quite prevalent. And even people like Suzanne Cook-Greuter, who is a transpersonal psychologist, she understands that there are higher levels in beyond second tier or beyond centaur or beyond what Levenger calls her integrative level. And she measures at least 2 or 3 of those. And you can take her test. She'll be glad to give it to you anytime you like. And so this is important because it does mean that we have ways to objectively determine that there are stages or levels of development. And we can effectively reproduce test scores showing what level a person is at. Mm-hmm. So there's nothing subjective about these stages of development. They're very real, they're very present, and most of all, they're very important. Mm-hmm. Because, I mean, when I first discovered the stages of development, I was blown away. First of all, I was very angry because some of the highest stages were ones that you'd get into like with Zen Buddhism, where there would be things like Satori and enlightenment. And I was like, I'm so angry. Why did nobody ever tell me this? Because I didn't find out about it till I was in my adolescence, my teens. And I was going, I'm pissed that not only these levels are there, but there are these higher levels. And I know that I'm going to be fairly high, but I got still higher I can go. Mm-hmm. And once I found that out, I started studying every mystical tradition I could get my hands on. I read every developmental psychologist, and looking for ways to get myself up there. Yeah. So that's all very important because it does indicate, as I said, that these stages are real. They're very objective reality elements. And we all go through them. Mm-hmm. And whether we go through them quickly or somewhat more slowly, they're the same stages in all of us, mm-hmm. and they all go through the same levels of development in all of us. So that's a very interesting discovery. Mm-hmm. And it was a discovery that was only made in psychology about 100 years ago by a genius named James Mark Baldwin. He was an American psychologist who was a colleague and a friend of the guy that wrote Varieties of Religious Experience, William James.
William James,
William James was himself a genius. And it's funny because William James was studying states of consciousness while his friend James Mark Baldwin was figuring out stages of consciousness.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And so we have states and we have stages. And these two basically discovered both of them. Mm-hmm. And so that I always thought was really interesting. And of course, I started studying the works of James Baldwin along with William James, who I already knew about. I mean, most people have had some contact or have heard the name William James. And many people have read his Varieties of religious experience, because it's a very readable, wonderfully done book.
And yet, I don't know if you know it, but in at least in Spanish, when they were here in Spain, when we were reading things about the history of psychology,
Right.
even epistemology about what psychology was as a scientific discipline, they were like denying William James because he was overridden, they said, by behaviorism, and
Yeah.
he was denied and put aside,
Well,
even though, even which is very paradoxical, because even though he was named the father, one of the fathers of the American psychology, all right, he was then denied and said, oh, he was overridden because he was too much like, in the spiritual realms, and like
yeah.
because he was mixing with Suzuki and things, others like so, and this behaviorist thought that he was not, scientific enough to
Yeah.
be.
Well, that's one of many, many things that behaviorists got wrong. Because behaviorists didn't like anybody who was dealing with the upper left quadrant.
Right.
And so they just deny it. And the only thing that was real was behavior from the upper right quadrant.
Right. That's it. That's it.
And so, of course, they would throw away anybody who was even a genius if they were coming from the upper left.
Absolutely.
And talking about interiors or insides or states of consciousness or anything like that. Behaviorists didn't believe that the left-hand quadrant existed.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
I mean, talk about getting something wrong. That's about as wrong as you can actually be. And
I
make
know.
if you want to get a statement really wrong, just say the upper left isn't real.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's about as stupid a thing as you can conceive.
You see that I wish that I would have had your terminology and your beautiful integral theory when I was studying psychology in
Yeah.
1982. Okay. Because, I learned about your integral theory and farther on in 1987, 8, but 1982, because if I would have had those terminology to all my teachers that were very, very behaviorist, I would have said, hey, look at this. You are
Right.
talking only about exteriors, and therefore you are missing half of reality.
That's right.
You see?
That's right. And it's a real shame because behaviorism really did catch on in a big way, including in America. And even today, I would wager if you go into any university in the United States and say, I want to study psychology. Should I study William James or be a behaviorist? Most of them would probably still say, oh, behaviorism, because it's still got that scientific claim.
It's a great bias. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
And
such a
all it's doing is directly denying experiential, objectively real reality. And you might as well claim, well, I can't see a real world out there, or I can't be sure that you have a mind yourself because I can't directly experience it, so it's not real. But I'm a behaviorist, so I study only things that can be studied. So I can only look at how you experience your reality and the names you give it and all of those objective facts about it. And I'll study that, and that'll make me a real scientist. And all it does is make you a genuine idiot. Absolute idiot. Um,
Absolutely, absolutely.
so
Because they deny something that then they cannot really maintain. Because when they deny, for example, the upper left, you tell them, okay, you deny it, and yet, have you been meditating for 25 years and then say that that is not true?
yeah,
Do you do that? Can you do that? Because if you cannot answer after 25 years, because you have not meditated during 25 years, then how can you deny something you have not experienced? You are against your own argumentary.
right. Yeah, it's like trying to deny the existence of Satori.
Right.
Satori is a genuine, real experience, and real people have had a Satori by the thousands.
That's
I
right.
mean, an entire major branch of religious involvement is Zen Buddhism, is devoted to developing a Satori-like experience, which is an upper left experience of unity with the entire world. And if
Yeah.
you have yourself had a Satori, like you say, then you don't have any right to claim it's real or unreal. I mean, show me that you've had at least one Satori and you deny its reality, and then maybe we'll have something to talk about. But
That's
until
right.
you demonstrate that you actually know what you're talking about, I have no obligation to listen to you, let alone to believe you.
That's right.
And unfortunately, behaviorism came into existence. It was somewhat after William James, but it very quickly, by the 1950s in America, it had become the scientific approach to
Yeah.
reality.
With
Uh,
Watson.
yeah, and it was based on a famous psychologist, American psychologist, work with pigeons
Yeah.
because he could actually, measure their responses and so
And
on.
also monkeys, a lot of monkeys.
A lot of monkeys, a lot of pigeons, a lot of rats, very big on rats. And I think it's just perfectly fits their own psychology
Yeah.
wonderfully well.
Anyway, let's
Yeah.
go to the third question, which goes in light of the work of Cian Born-Hagens with UFOs and other mysteries, and seemingly that there's strong evidence that ancient civilizations had advanced technology, let's say the construction of the pyramids, for example, or Machu Picchu, or Eastern Island, or Stonehenge. If that were the case, how would you fit these cultures into the integral map? How would an integral map would work for advanced civilizations that may roam the universe?
Yeah. Well, you can take something like the studies that various Egyptian scholars have made about the very, very advanced civilization of Egypt and the early dynasties, the making of the pyramids, and so on. And many of them believe that they did indeed have very advanced technologies, that the pyramids, for example, were involved with the creation of various energy sources. And there's a fair amount of evidence that demonstrates that some of these early societies were quite advanced. But keep in mind that in understanding a human being's capacity to create technology, and therefore an entire civilization's creation of technology, it only takes a small handful of people to invent the technology. And then a very small other handful of people can build the technology. And it's the nature of technology that once it's in existence, anybody can use it. So I don't have to invent this computer or build it myself. It's already, somebody already did that. I can just go out and buy one. So we can look at a civilization, and they're all human beings. They're all going to be born, and therefore they're going to go through these stages of development that I've outlined. And as for people moving into the higher stages and creating high-level technology, remember, only a very small handful of people have to do that. And yet the whole civilization can get their hands on the technology and can show a very high technological level of development. It would still be a level that would fit into my overall stages of development. They might get all the way up to second tier, or a few of them might get into third tier. Now, we clearly had some civilizations develop into third tier, having a third tier Satori. But the number of people in China or Japan that had Satori was still very small.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even though Zen Buddhism is built on Satori, how many Zen priests were present in early Japan? Not very many.
Not very many.
A couple hundred at most. So the fact that certain civilizations were very advanced has been confused by a lot of people. And I think Sean Esborn-Hargens makes this mistake on occasion, that by simply tapping into that group of 100 or so people that are truly advanced and are creating technologies that are equally advanced, and then those technologies spread throughout their entire civilization. So, which is what appeared to happen with places like Egypt and Easter Island, Stonehenge, Machu Picchu, places like that. Those show fairly high levels of architectural development. Machu Picchu, for example, or the pyramids. But again, the number of people who made the pyramids were either slave people or very advanced teachers of technology.
One thing is the creation, and another thing is who really makes them, because the slaves were obliged to create what they were being said. But
that's right. That's why. Well, that's why you don't want to take the production of slaves as an example of the level that everybody in their society was.
That's right. That's right. That's an error, a clear error. Yeah.
Right.
Like, for example, technology says it is a very technological society. Yeah, but that doesn't mean, that the whole society is in a high level of consciousness.
It doesn't mean
because
that.
It's like you say, very many little which have the capacity to create that, and to even, let's say, understand and even use sometimes that. So yeah, that
and that's an important point to remember. It's also an important point for us to remember in recognized advanced technological states, such as the United States, where everybody gets a free education, and in some states, of course, even college education is included. And so we count them as being part of the larger society. And so when we say the United States is a fairly technological society, we mean that a lot of people have gotten at least a college education. And that's true. But many other cultures, especially ancient ones, had a small number of very advanced people who made very advanced technologies and advanced architecture and had relatively advanced cultures, even though very few people were actually at those higher levels of development themselves. And that's a very important distinction.
And yet, as I understand what you're saying, it's people are very advanced when they have gone to university. No, not necessarily. They are advanced in the level of cognitive line, but
That's right.
they may not be advanced in consciousness at all.
No, well, that's quite correct. And that's why I said I refer specifically the technological line of development. But most people, even that go to universities, remain fairly stupid when it comes across multiple intelligences. They're not
Absolutely.
artistic geniuses. They're not literary geniuses. They're
That's
not
right.
artistic geniuses. And so we got to watch out for that. Yeah.
So that's why, we have to be very aware of not saying that because a person has gone to university, it's very developed, because it may
Right.
not.
Nor should we make the mistake of saying because one culture happened to build 3 large pyramids, they were hugely advanced. They were, as a culture, all of their people were technologically, artistically, linguistically, aesthetically advanced. Not so. And
Yes.
there's no question in my mind that if you or Sean Espo and Harkins had a choice between living in Egypt during the age of the pyramids or living in America in today's age, that you would choose America, no
For
doubt.
sure. For sure.
Yeah,
That's for sure.
yeah,
Absolutely.
right.
So, Ken, would you say that in societies, science and religion are more interpenetrated nowadays than when you wrote your book of 1999, The Marriage of Sense and Soul? Or is that happening individually?
It's not happening as fast as I would like to see the integration occur. And the 60s were something of an anomaly, because the one thing that a great number of boomers, 60s children did was they took psychedelic drugs. And the one fairly dependable result of taking a psychedelic drug is to have a psychedelic experience. And numerous studies have shown that most psychedelic experiences have several things in common. For one, they all have a direct experience of being one with everything. And by any language, that's known as a spiritual experience. And so in the 1960s, an enormous number of college students and teenagers even, and certainly adults, including people like Alan Watts, were writing books about psychedelic experience. And that meant unity with everything. Everything you're aware of right now, you are already one with. And that's happening right now. Everything you're looking at is actually occurring right where you thought your head existed. And you'll notice that this is, I'm borrowing on a book written by Douglas Harding called On Having No Head. And in it, he explains why the timeless now, the mystical experience, mystics claim it's ever present. You're already aware of it right now. You don't have to go out and get that experience. You just have to notice what's happening right now. And according to Douglas Harding, and this is what makes the book so different and funny in a sense, is he says you can see every part of your body except your head. You can't see your head. You can see two little fleshy blobs that's your nose, but you can't see your face. You can't see your eyes. You can't see your teeth. You can't, it's right. Where you think your head is actually everything you're looking at right now. It's all, if you look at your computer screen, if you look at a tree outside, the tree in the computer screen is arising right where you thought your head used to be. And so you don't really have a head. What you have is an experience of unity with everything you're aware of. And that's happening right now, whether you're aware of it or not. So we have this unified experience. And the interesting thing about that unity is that it has a subjective component and an objective component. It used to be that the subjective component was given a fair degree of importance as a way for us to get at a certain truth. It's true that the truth was subjective. It was an interior truth. It's something William James would count as very important. But when behaviorists started trying to become scientific and just look at objects of behavior, that we got this huge split between subjective and objective. And that's, of course, a natural enough condition. And we're all brought up in that belief today anyway. And so when you have it pointed out that you really don't have a head, that you're really already one with everything that's arising, and it's arising right where you thought your head was, that's a great discovery.
It is.
That's a very important discovery. And so objective science and interior science are deeply interconnected. And most of the mystics of the world's religions are aware of that subject-object unity, because it's called a mystical experience, and it's called a mystical experience of unity because you do become aware of the fact that you are one with everything that's arising in your awareness right now.
Moment to moment.
Yeah. And the mystics know that. It's like St. Paul said, let this consciousness be in you, which was in Christ Jesus, that we all may be one. And that's exactly right. It's obvious to St. Paul. It's obvious to any Zen Buddhist, any Hindu, any Christian mystic. But it still needs to be pointed out every now and then. And that's what I was doing with the marriage of science and religion. Mm-hmm. And I was in religion, I was talking about the mystical experience of a spiritual union. And that is dealing with the same unitary reality that science is dealing with. which is why William James looked at spiritual experiences as being scientific realities.
Mm-hmm.
And he was
Mm-hmm.
absolutely right.
Yeah.
And that's what he was trying to show with the varieties of religious experience, is that we have an enormous number of these experiences, and they're all experiences of a unity, a oneness with all of reality. So
So you
I
don't think
decided,
society has arrived to get together that objectiveness and that subjectivity together? No.
no, well, that's why I say it hasn't been occurring as fast as I wanted. And it was a little bit different in the 1960s because so many people had taken psychedelics, and so many well-known philosophers from Aldous Huxley to Alan Watts had written entire books on the mystical experience generated by psychedelics. And so I had at least a fair amount of hope that that would continue.
And it did.
No, it didn't. Um,
It's such a pity. And yet it is right now when we more need it. You know, we need more than ever to recognize this unity, this integration between subject and object. Because if
right,
we don't recognize that, we keep on being split. And right now, with all the things that are happening in our world, it
yeah,
will be most needed to really encounter that reality. Because if
yeah,
not, we are really lost. We are
right.
really.
That's true. That's true. And among other things, it would reintroduce the reality of the religious or spiritual dimension, which is very good because, as we know, when the world's only real choice is between Christianity or nothing, the nothing in today's world is going to win more often than the Christian version is. I noticed that the Catholic Church does a lot of research asking people like the Pew Corporation or so on to ask people questions like, if you don't go to church anymore, why did you stop? And the number one reason people gave for stopping going to church,
Yeah.
especially the youngsters, that almost none of whom go to church, said, I don't believe it. It's not believable. Some guy born from a virgin and turning water into wine and, you know, fishes out of loaves. And I mean, I just don't believe any of it. It's all a bunch of myths. And that basically that's correct. It
Right.
is.
Right.
Um,
But
but
that's why I would say that they need to change their way to present religion.
right,
They need to be marketers of what they're selling, because if not, people is not gonna get it.
right. That's true. And that's a very good point. They need to become better marketers because
Absolutely.
that's what they're doing. They're marketing a product. And unfortunately, the design that went into the product is over 2,000 years old. And it's just not believable.
Actualize.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And
That's
so, but I had hoped that some of the signs that were obvious in the 60s would catch on a bit and stabilize and even expand. But no, it hasn't really happened. Um, and all I find is a general lessening of the belief in the religious myths. So that's like the number one reason the kids gave for quitting church is I don't believe it. And I think that disbelief is actually kind of increasing around the world. And the Catholic Church finds that they're losing believers in a fairly alarming way.
Much more now when there is this terrible appearance of abuses of children and
Yeah,
teenagers. And
yeah,
that is being terrible. And at the same time, don't you think that that will serve as well to shaken the roots of the religion, of the Christianity, so much so that they may start to open their eyes, to really give their beliefs, let's say, in a more, I think that it will be interesting to get closer to psychology instead of to the myths of 2000 years ago.
yeah,
So if they will get closer to psychology and then explain religion through uniting psychology and mysticism,
right.
that will give the message in a clearer way. No?
Well, it certainly would. And I think that psychology was primed to do this by William James. I mean, he's known as the father of American psychology, and it's for a good reason. I mean, he was really brilliant. He's an
Mhm.
absolute genius, unparalleled. And there's any number of psychological philosophers that turned back to William James during the psychedelic experience because they would say, oh, he knew this. He was already writing on all his varieties of religious experience. And that's because he was aware, whether he himself tried it or he was just a genius who noticed that this mystical experience was something that occurred in virtually every culture going way back some 10,000 years and maybe even more with shamanism. But he would notice something like that because he was William James. And he did, and he wrote about it. And it was just wonderful writing. It was just brilliant stuff. Um, and I hope that we get to a point where his books become really highly recommended, and particularly in psychology. That would be great.
I know. Okay, let's see if that happens. Let's hope so.
Okay.
In last year's interview, Ken, you talked about renewable energies related to the extraction of fossil fuels without CO2 emissions, what it will put an end to air pollution. How is that project developing? 1 year ago, you said that it would be ready in 18 months or so. So do you
Right.
think we'll really see the light in 6 more months?
Well, I'm involved with the people that are making this energy, and I know them quite well. And they have donated an enormous amount of money from their project to Integral Institute. So I can't really speak sort of objectively about them, but I've seen the process. I know what it does. And it can indeed produce, you can burn any fossil fuel you want. And if you put it through this process, it will first take out all CO2 from the fossil fuel. So when you burn it, it doesn't release any CO2 or any
But why is not still being like spread out into the world so that everyone uses it?
yeah. Um, a lot of it has to do with getting permissions from the state of Texas, for example. A lot of it's legal issues
Yeah.
and so on. But they have come up, it's a very creative intellectual process that they used when they developed this method. And in the course of that creative process, they discovered a lot of other things that this process would do. And they're working on some of those other things as well. And so that's what's taking them a fair amount of time. So they can, for example, clean up methane, which is a very bad greenhouse gas, and it's produced by every natural gas production as a side product. Well, they have a way that they can get rid of that side product. And so methane itself becomes very clean, and there's no carbon dioxide created by its work. So they're going to bring that out first, simply because it just attaches to whatever natural gas producing unit you already have. So you don't have to make another one using this process to then produce a clean natural gas. That just, you just buy a little unit and put it on your natural gas production and it'll do it. And so they're going to do that first. So that took, of the 18 months, it probably took about half of that. So it's been
you don't have any idea about when, because people is asking, very interested, precisely because they want to know when are we going to be able to see the results of it.
Yeah. I would only guess again that it'll be somewhere less than 18 months. I'm just not tracking that closely. I know how real it is. I mean, I've seen it produce this stuff. And I stay in touch with the people that are doing it quite often. They often visit out here. So that's all I can really say. I wish I had better news.
I know, but I know that these things are difficult because, like you say, permission and recognitions of patents and things like that are not easy, are not an easy task, much more less in the United States, which is everything so accurate.
Yeah.
Oh, so what are the things that you wish you did in your life that were not possible to make because of your commitment to your main work and focus? It's a very personal question. I understand.
Sure. I don't mind the question. I'm trying to think of anything else that I would have been as happy doing as I am writing and thinking up this material. I mean, that's just so far ahead of anything else that I could think of. I mean, it sort of makes me think of reincarnation theories, that we're all born or reborn with a particular purpose and a particular drive and a particular creative potential. And that some people, you just know from a very early age that they were meant to be a singer, or they were meant to be a movie star, or there was something you say, I knew from the moment I saw this person that they were going to make a big hit in doing something. And that's how I feel about this writing. And that's why I have indeed written 30 books on the topic. And they're published in over 30 foreign languages. And I just can't imagine anything else. I suppose I would say, well, I suppose I could be a sports star, devote my life to some sort of sports effort, but I can't really
Yeah, but
believe.
you see, at least sports is what it comes to your mind the first. So maybe yes, sports. Yeah, why not? Yeah,
Yeah.
because nothing regarding a family and kids and things like that. Not at all.
No.
You see, that's clear. That's to have clear ideas on what you are not missing at all.
Right.
That's So, why did you change the colors from spiral dynamics in your consciousness levels? Many people don't like it, and Don Beck was very disappointed with it as well. So, why
Yeah.
did you change that?
Um, because um, John Beck, who we were very good friends at the time, and I've always respected him, but he had a sort of a reputation as seeing spiral dynamics as doing everything. And spiral dynamics covered every important topic, and it covered all of Zen and all of Vedanta and all of Christian mysticism, and you just didn't need anything else. And what I had written in my psychology book, specifically like integral psychology, is in that book, I talked about developmental psychologists. And in the back of that book, I listed the stages of over 100 developmental models. And I listed the stages of each of them. So there were Loevinger stages and Kohlberg stages and Arrietty stages and Maslow stages and on and on. And what was really clear is that all of those stages had a certain similarity. So you could see that Jane Loevinger called her highest stage integrated, and Maslow called his highest stages integral, and on and on. And so one of those 100 models was Claire Graves and spiral dynamics. And I didn't want Don to continue to claim that spiral dynamics did everything that all of these models did. And so when I went to use colors, I decided I won't use the same colors. I'll have different colors. And that was actually harder than it might sound. Because I didn't want to use the same color at the same stage for any of the stages I presented. So blue, I didn't include a blue stage. I included a magenta stage and a violet, an ultraviolet stage, but no blue stage anywhere in it. So if you wanted to refer to my work, you couldn't use the color blue. Because if you did, Don would immediately claim that you're using spiral dynamics.
Yeah.
And that was it. I mean, that was the sum total of it. And I knew he wouldn't like it. And I knew that there were other problems with it, like other people being aware of it and having to figure it out and all of that. But I was determined that Don Beck would not be able to do it. And so I simply chose.
I understand what you're saying because it was a misleading way. I learned with Don Beck himself in Dinkelschirben when he gave his course on spiral dynamics in Europe. I was one of the ones with Peter Mary that took the course with him.
Yeah.
And when I was listening, because I was already integral,
Right.
and when I listened to him, I was saying, he is pretending that his way of explaining spiral
Right.
dynamics is integral, and is not. So this is a discussion I have had with many people which are followers of spiral dynamics, and which they, defend very strongly. And they say, but then it's the same that integral is trying to do. And I said, no, but integral is not trying to say that it is in all levels. No,
Right.
integral only explains that there are levels, but
Right.
it doesn't pretend to say that it's everything,
Right.
in the sense of, I always say, and please correct me if it's not so, that the spiral dynamics represents a value line.
Right.
Is that
That's
correct?
correct. Yeah. I've,
Very good.
in the past several books, I've referred to a process that, in addition to waking up, which is having an enlightenment, and covers at least 5 major different states of consciousness, none of which, by the way, are covered by spiral dynamics, none of them. So we have waking up, then we have growing up, and growing up is the process. We have multiple intelligences, and usually psychologists give between 8 and 10 multiple intelligences. And Clare Graves covered 1. He covered values intelligence, and that's it. He didn't cover artistic development or any of those.
That's it.
And Don has never understood that, ever. And
But
so,
that's what I try to tell the people that defend spiral dynamics. I say, you do not understand integral theory. If you say that, you don't understand integral theory.
right, that's true. And so we have growing up, and then in terms of multiple intelligences, I've added opening up, which means you can yourself become aware of the fact that you have 8 or 9 different intelligences. You have cognitive intelligence, emotional intelligence, moral intelligence, spiritual intelligence, aesthetic intelligence, and so on.
Which is
But
the
what's
same
interesting
size,
is
isn't
they're
it?
all lines go through the same levels of development. And
Yes.
spiral dynamics misses all of that.
Don't do that.
It,
Right.
it doesn't even have more than 1 intelligence. And it
Yes.
calls that a V meme for value meme, because that's what it's studying, are levels of values.
That's right.
So that's the main reason.
Yeah.
And it also covers, of course, showing up and clearing up. Clearing up means working with shadow material so you can clear up your neurotic emotional mess. And showing up means including all 4 quadrants or all 8 multiple zones of development. And each of those 4 quadrants need to be included because they're the subjective and the objective and the intersubjective and the interobjective. And those are all very real realities, a fact that is not touched on by spiral dynamics or even mentioned. So it's a mess when people think that because I use some of the same colors that Don did, even though never exactly the same, that I'm just using spiral dynamics. I've gotten a lot out of it. I appreciate it. It's one of the important of my 100 different models that I've drawn from, and I've always admitted that. That's why I would never really get that mad at Don when he would refer to his as an integral psychology. I just kind of shake my head and go, yeah, whatever.
Whatever.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Um,
But he
so
needed to present it that way because he believed in it. He
I know.
really he really was like in love with the theory, same
Yeah.
as I am in love with integral theory, but yet it's because I am in love with what it means, integral theory,
Right.
which it's for me a pair of glasses to see the reality in 360 degrees.
Right.
And
That's
then you
right.
can put them on or not, but you
Yeah.
can see it all. It's not this or that, which is
No.
what they pretend to do with the spiral dynamic. This is it. No, no, no. Integral theory doesn't tell you what it is.
Right.
It tells you what it can be whenever you look up or down or to the right or to the left or up or in or out.
Yeah.
So they don't understand. And I say, goodness, you know,
No. Well, you can just start by asking them, what color is Zen Buddhism? Just start with that. They don't have a
a
level for
for
sure.
that.
They don't understand it.
Very
Anyway,
good. Very
but
good question. Very good
yeah,
question. I will tell them so.
yeah.
So, what do you think about Greta Thunberg?
Um, I think she's largely being used by her parents to present their ecological religious system. Uh, and I just, first of all, the fact that she's autistic, I think would prevent most caring parents from letting their little girl become the coverage of national news media, because you're always going to get bad news with that. Somebody's going to look at it in a really bad way, and it could even be dangerous for her to do it. But I certainly wouldn't just let her go out blaring like that and get put on the front page of every national magazine and every newspaper in the world. That's a very dangerous thing to let an autistic child do. But I just, otherwise, I mean, I thought she had some interesting things to say. I don't think they're factually accurate. It's not factually the case. If you really look at climate science, for example, it's not true. It's nowhere near the case that, quote, 97% of scientists agree that we're headed for a catastrophic climactic breakdown. The number that believe that is very small. Yeah,
I don't think so. There are more than belief that we are heading toward a great problem. No, not that we are not heading. We are in a catastrophic situation, climatically speaking. Not that we are heading toward, because we don't know that. That's true. And yet, that we are traversing a momentum of terrible climate change that cannot be denied because we experience it all in our own skins.
right.
So,
Well,
you know,
sure. But you can listen to people that explain that very differently. And they don't see it as catastrophic meltdowns, or, and they certainly don't see it as an existential crisis, which means life or death
yeah,
experience. So people even like Jordan Peterson, who is a big YouTube internet star and very, very smart, he doesn't believe we're anywhere near a climate crisis. And I think that, because I've studied this process a lot, and I also studied where the person who claimed that 97% of scientists agree that we're in trouble, that we're headed for a catastrophic meltdown, and they got it. It's a completely crazy story, but it's nowhere near 97%. That this was a person who was just going through all of the scientific sounding articles they could find, and most of the people that they counted as scientists didn't even say there was a climate catastrophe. It's nowhere near 97% of them said that we were going to experience a climate crisis. It was nowhere near 97%. It was way less than 50%, for example. So I don't agree with what Greta, I don't agree with her facts. I know it's a hot topic, and a lot of people still think 97% of scientists are agreed on this, but it's just not true. And otherwise, I wish her well, but.
Sure. And yet I understand what you mean about using the girl, and at the same time to look for the positive in it. The only thing, I don't know if you would agree, the only thing I could find is this pool of the youngsters, of the young people, to really stand up and talk in what they think and in what they believe. And she is like, let's say, like a representation of how youth could really stand up and talk what they want, so that they can walk in it. See? So just in that sensation, I would say Greta, it's a good example, let's say. No.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't argue with that. I just don't happen to think that
Not
way.
nice. It's not nice. The use of what you say of what their parents do with her. Yeah, absolutely. So what do you foresee that the future brings in the light of what's happening in Ukraine and Iran?
Yeah, well, they're both really unfortunate. And I think they're especially unfortunate because they tend to display a very bad tendency that the United States of America has in the use of its military as part of its foreign policy. So whether we're talking about North or South Korea or China or India or Iraq and Iran, Afghanistan, these are all places that, and I want to be careful here because I have, in a sense, something negative to say about the United States, but I don't want to overemphasize that that's what's going on. But especially, I mean, you take some place like Afghanistan, we've had our troops in, we have been fighting a war in that country for 17 years now. I mean, that's just ridiculous. 17 years of continuous fighting. That was as long as the Vietnam War. But neither one of them were the first time we'd ever done something like that. And so it starts to get a little concerning that we find ourselves saying, okay, we've spent 17 years killing those people, and they still won't let go. How stupid can they be? Well, I don't know. Maybe you should look at your own policies. So it concerns me that we get into those kinds of situations. And when the USSR was still in existence, we used to get into those situations even more. And the reason that so many countries around the world are divided into North Vietnam and South Vietnam and North Korea and South Korea and North this and South that was that we were afraid the Russians were moving in, because they often were, and the Russians would move into the side of the country that was closest to them, so they'd be in North Korea, and we'd of course support South Korea. And then the Russians would move into North Vietnam, and we'd of course support South Vietnam. And there was always there was an East and West Germany, in the same reason. And that always bothered me, is having the world split up into these military factions. And especially since both military factions had enough nuclear weapons to blow each other completely off the planet. Our military program was called MAD, Mutual Assured Destruction. And it was mutually assured destruction, and it was MAD. It always killed me that they got the wording of that just right. Yeah, it's mad. You're mad to be doing this. So that's, it's not good that Russia, to give fair treatment, it's not good that Russia moves into Crimea when it wanted to and just took it. It's not good that Russia has moved into Ukraine and is trying to just take it. None of that is good. And it's, again, these are very big military powers. And the only way we have of actually stopping them, besides giving a lot of money to Ukraine and helping them buy troops from Western Europe and stuff like that, is if they got in an actual nuclear war.
Do you think so? Do you think that may happen?
Well, of course. And the only reason I thought that is because of the history of Russia itself, and not to mention our history. I mean, we got into an almost nuclear catastrophe in Vietnam, and they would use nuclear, localized nuclear weapons on the battlefield. And so I mean, you just can't rule it out. So none of that is good news to me.
No, it's not. It's not. And it's really like looking dark. And therefore, in darkness times, we better prepared in the sense of we better look in, because really looking out is not nice at all. So, the recommendation that I always give to people is, come on, it's, even if you don't believe in anything, just look in, because it's time to do so, because outside is cold.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And looking within can indeed not only give you that headless sense of oneness with everything, it also awakens that part of yourself that the Christians call the soul, or Hindus call Brahman, Atman, and it's Zen just refers to as the real self.
or the
And
void.
that
Or,
is the part of your awareness that is eternal, literally eternal. And that's exactly the only part of you that would survive if there were a nuclear madness going off.
that's
So,
right.
yeah. So that's another good reason to look within.
I'll meet you there.
Okay, you've got it. And even the Christian mystics were aware of that inner consciousness. Um,
Mm. Do you know
so,
that through the mystics, I mean, at least in Spain, mysticism started to be recognized by religion
yeah,
only like 20 years ago,
yeah,
20 to 30 years ago.
yeah. And how could they do that given St. John of the Cross, St.
And
Teresa of Avila? I mean, those are some of the greatest mystics in the world.
incredible, incredible. It was denied somehow because it was too innerly, you see,
Oh, to William Jamesy.
to William Jameses. That's right. So it's no, 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 no. Let's
Oh,
pray. Let's pray, which is the outside. Let's pray more. Blah, 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 blah. And no enter into.
right.
Come on. You know,
Yeah,
now they are starting to open to that more clearly, let's say.
right.
They have even created in Avila, it's from the Carmelites. It's called, even though it's not recognized by the academics, they are called the Mystical University
Oh, that's great.
or the University of Mystics. It's created by the Carmelites, and they are looking to be also recognized by academic
Oh,
because
that's great.
they use the name, but they are not recognized by academics. So,
Well, that's, I mean, it's to say that somebody that has completed their college degree, that they're smart, is really an example of academics that are usually the last people you want to check with.
that get it.
Yeah,
Absolutely. So let's see what the future brings with that as well, because it
right,
will be wonderful that people has that access to learn mysticism, to experience mysticism from also an academic point of view, which will
right,
be the higher level of the cognitive line as well.
right. That's correct. Um, and given that you do have, as a Spanish inheritance, the
Absolutely.
St. John and St. Teresa are, I mean, they're two of the greatest mystics anyway. And they're not
Absolutely.
the only Spanish mystics. They're just two of the very greatest to have occurred anywhere on the planet. And
Absolutely.
it would just be a shame that they're not getting access in academic settings. It's just, it's appalling, actually.
I know. So let's see. Now, let's follow with the following question, which I would like to see. Let me see. It's the question which says, which are the risks, traps, and fallacies on the passage from green, the end of the first degree of consciousness, to teal on the second grade? And how would you recommend to avoid them?
Okay, I'm trying to. Oh, was
The,
that, which
the
are the risks,
fallacies,
traps,
traps,
and
and
fallacies?
fallacies on the passage from green, the end
Right,
of the first degree of consciousness, to teal on the second grade. And
right.
how do you recommend to avoid them?
Yeah. Okay. The biggest difficulty in passing from green to teal to turquoise is getting from green to teal in the first place.
Sure.
And the reason for that is that teal is called various names. It's a multiplistic stage, or it's a postmodern stage, or it's a post-rational stage. It's also often it's referred to as a post-conventional stage too. And what it does is it moves beyond orange into green, because what it does when it does that is it creates what's often called a pluridimensional or a multiplistic universe. And all that is orange is known as a universal rationality or uniformity. And that's because orange is also called systemic, because orange looks at all the various cultures on the planet and finds what they all have in common. And it reproduces that information through its universalistic capacity. Now, green goes one step further, and it looks at all those universal systems that orange has, in a sense, created or recognized. And it says, no, wait a minute, you can get truth from all of those. So we have really a multiplistic universe. And that's where it gets the name multiplistic or multi-rational or post-rational. And so it divides the universal systems up into multiple number of multiple
perspectives,
conventions. So what it can't do, it comes up with these multi-systemic, multi-systems or trans systems, but it can't pull all of those together. So green divides up the universal system of a oneness that orange recognizes, but all it does is produce a multitude of different multi-conventional, post-conventional, multiple systems. And that can in itself be a problem, because it is, for example, that is the source of postmodernism. Because postmodernism claimed there are no universals at all. They just got rid of orange. And all they found was a multitude of different systems of multiculturalism. And this multiculturalism was what was real. And it didn't even believe in objective truth.
Relativism, in one word, right?
Of course. Of course. And so this multiplistic, relativistic universe is what green gives us. And so it's the root of our PC cultures, which are problems in themselves. And green finds itself frequently fragmented into these multiple systems. And it tries like crazy to pull them all together into a single, unified, coherent oneness, a system. And it can't do it. The first stage that can pull all of these multiple systems together is teal or second tier. And that's why teal is often called paradigmatic, because it pulls all of the different systems together into overarching unified paradigms. It's also referred to as unity or unified or systemic and so on. And so being able to make that leap from a relativistic green to a unified teal, a paradigmatic teal, is the first really important step into second tier consciousness. And the problem, of course, is that it's actually a quite difficult step to make. That's why most models that include second tier, like Jane Loevinger, Kohlberg, or so on, give the total percentage of the population that's at teal is somewhere between 6 and 7%. And yet green, some 25% of the population is at green, going around making PC, politically correct statements and ripping the universe up into multicultural, pluralistic, relativistic systems. And it's just a mess. And I mean, I used to get so upset with green that people would think, they would start calling my books, oh, you're doing that anti-green book. And I'd go, so I'd actually, every time in the chapter where I was covering green, I'd actually write with a subtitle, a section called The Many Gifts of Green, just so people wouldn't think I'm just anti-green. But green does have many different gifts. And that includes not taking orange's single universal systems and making them absolute. I mean, that's a fine gift. But then when we get to teal, it's called paradigmatic because it makes paradigms. Now, the problem at this stage is it makes a fair number of paradigms, and yet it doesn't itself have the cognitive strength or capacity to pull those paradigms together into what's called cross paradigmatic.
Cross.
Cross. CROSS.
Oh, cross.
Cross paradigmatic. And that's the name that's given to the level that can pull these paradigms together. And that's the turquoise level. But that is even much, much rarer than teal. Jane Loevinger's careful research, for example, shows that 0.5% of the entire population makes it to turquoise, which she calls an integrated level. And of course, her system is the most widely used developmental model in the world. And she's done an enormous amount to help developmental studies and an enormous amount to forward the research on developmental studies. And her model has been tested and tested and tested. And there have never been any major contradictions found in her model, which is why it is the single most widely used developmental model, even more so than Piaget's. And Piaget in the 50s was a huge hit, especially in education. Every teacher knew the stages you go through in Piaget's cognitive development. So those are the three major stages: green, the teal, the turquoise. And those are the major problems that they each get into. So green gets caught in a relativistic, multicultural, pluralistic world. And teal gets caught in its paradigmatic world. They can't come up with a cross paradigmatic structure. And turquoise does come up with a cross paradigmatic structure, which is very rare, again, 0.5%. And I was just shocked when I first heard that. And I actually got a baseball cap and had 0.5% written across the baseball cap. And then every time I'd get a visitor who would come over, which was often, and tell me that we're going through a new paradigm right now that's going to unify everything, I just put
You
this
put your cap on.
and just leave it there and see if they ask me what it meant. And very few people actually asked me. But if I did, I'd go, that's the number of people that are working on this new paradigm.
Would you say, Ken, because it came to my mind when you said about the cross unity in turquoise, because it came your creation of the multiplex. Would you say that was multiplex for you?
The creation of what?
You remember your multiplex?
Yeah. Yes, that
Would you
was.
say that was turquoise image?
Yeah. And yes, and the whole beginning of a third tier set of stages. Now, mostly third tier or post second tier higher stages are experienced as states of consciousness. So in Zen, for example, they have the total number of stages of development that they give is 5. And they go through the 5 stages of third tier. And Satori being the ultimate sort of experience that they recommend. Those states of consciousness I don't refer to as a stage of growing up, which all the stages per se in the first, second, and third tier are stages of consciousness. I refer to those waking up characteristics as states of consciousness, because that's how they're usually experienced. So you know that you can tell the difference between a state and a stage by just looking within. You can't see a single stage of consciousness. Like if you look within right now, you will never see a state of thought called a concrete operational stage, or you'll never see a stage of thought called a formal operational stage. You can't see them. They're just not open to introspection. But every time you have a first person state of experience, you know it. It doesn't matter what it is. If it's being one with the entire universe in love and bliss, you know you're one with the whole bloody universe. And you know you're in the state of love and the state of bliss. And that's unmistakable. So that's a very easy way to tell the difference between states of consciousness, which are first person, direct experiential experiences, and structures of consciousness, which are third person, objective states or levels of experience. And that's a really important distinction to make. And it's one that I started making fairly early on. And I would just actually call them states of consciousness and structures or structure stages of consciousness. And they were very important in my own understanding, particularly in clarifying the difference between waking up and growing up.
Yes,
Because
yes.
both of them have stages, so to speak, or levels even. But it's important to understand the difference between those two. And every mystical tradition has states, first person states of consciousness. And when you experience one of them, you know it. But they all also have, although not many of them know it or realize it, they have stages of growing up. And meditation can increase the speed that you'll go through those stages of growing up, but they are not themselves a stage of growing up at all. And if you're just relying on Zen to get you through growing up, you're not going to grow very fast at all.
Right.
So it's an important distinction.
Would you say, because I remember I met the president of the Transpersonal Association in Paris, which was Marc-Alain de Camps. I met him in 1996 or something like that. And I remember he was talking about the vertical consciousness and the horizontal consciousness, right? So could we say, just in my head to have it clear, could we say that waking up will be like the vertical and growing up will be like the horizontal?
Not exactly.
Okay, clarify, please.
The reason is that vertical and horizontal don't apply at all to growing up and waking up, or they can both be used to describe different aspects of each process. So vertical growing up, there is a certain sense in which waking up stages are also vertical. And that you can lay like the 5 Zen stages, which are frequently known as the 10 Zen ox-herding pictures. Those are all vertical movements, and they take you from one stage of waking up to a higher stage of waking up. But they also, there are degrees that you can experience at each of those vertical levels. You can have a very strong Zen initial waking up experience at about stage 2 or 3, and that could be viewed as a horizontal expansion of that stage of waking up. And you can go all the way to stage 10 and have a very minor experience of stage 10. It's real, but it's not very wide or very horizontally developed. Or you could go on and have a very wide, huge experience of Satori, and then it embraces sort of everything with no distinction at all. Well, the same thing can be said for the stages of growing up, because those stages are still usually thought of as vertical stages of development. But again, they're like stages of waking up. You can have a small degree of vertical growth. Maybe you can move from Piaget's pre-operational cognition to his concrete operational cognition, which is moving you from the capacity to just have a first person experiential understanding of something to concrete operational, which means you can concretely operate on the world. So then you can understand things like mathematics of addition or subtraction. So 2 plus 2 equals 4. When you think that way, you're thinking concrete operational cognition, because you're taking 2 times 2 and getting 4. And you can continue to grow vertically. And that's usually every time you move through a vertical stage, there's a different name given to it. Whereas if you have a horizontal expansion, it's not usually given a different name. It's just whoever's giving you the test can notice how strong you are in your outreach. So you could move from pre-operational thinking to concrete operational thinking in a really powerful way. So you get mathematics immediately. You could probably even go straight to doing algebra or something like that. That would be a very wide horizontal development of concrete operational thinking. And then when you move to the next stage, if you move up there, then you would be said to be at formal operational cognition. And it would be named formal operational cognition. It's no longer concrete operational thinking. It's no longer thought thinking about external reality. It's thought thinking about thought, which is an entirely different kind of cognition. It's a much bigger stage of growing up. But you could do that in a big way, or it could be relatively small in terms of its horizontal bigness. You could have a big, huge experience of formal operational. And then, like I said, you would be able to just almost immediately go to algebra or calculus or something like that. But they wouldn't give it, it's still formal operational cognition. They don't give you a different name for making that. But the teacher that's giving you the test would notice that you did really strong on that level of development. And so they would know that. But that's why I say vertical and horizontal can be used on both growing up and waking up and opening up and showing up, because these are just 2 essentially different dimensions of awareness that we have anywhere.
You see, but that's my problem. Let's say, well, not my, I wouldn't call it a problem, but I say that's my take into this matter, because I generally talk, think, and feel from these dimensions. And then it's kind of, people do not understand very well where I'm coming from. And I'm talking about dimensions in all realities.
Right.
And that's why, then I may confuse people when I talk, because I do not clarify that I'm talking about dimensions, so because I do experience these energies as very clear, horizontally and vertically, in a very clear way. So anyway, thank you for clarifying. That's very cool. Very cool. So could you give us first-person account of where you are at in your vertical development, precisely, regarding structure stages, and your horizontal development regarding state stages, how life is lived from that stage and that structure stage? Talking about that, have you thought of writing a second one taste, the journal of Ken Wilber, describing one of the current years in your life? It would be really inspiring for meditators.
Well, I haven't thought about doing that. I will, now that you bring it up. Give me something to do for
say.
several months.
Many people wants to know, how is your everyday life, you see?
Right,
How do you do every day? How do you develop your own inner life, and outerly, what do you do outwardly? Because if, like, knowing that you have this medical, let's say, this situation, then what do you do outwardly with that? Maybe
right,
for people will be interesting to know, how do you deal with all those things, say?
right. Um, well, talking about growing up, when I first conceived integral theory in my mid-adolescent period, mid-teens, um, I was 14 or 15 when I first came up with the generalized idea. Um, and that included all first tier and second tier stages. And although I knew that the highest third tier stage, or turquoise, was only reached by 0.5% of the population, I knew that there were a few people somewhere who had gone to higher stages. And whether Lovinger mentions that or not doesn't matter, because there's just simply no theoretical limit to where you can go. And I eventually would trace out 4 or 5 higher possibilities. But when I thought of the highest, or turquoise, second tier stage, I was at turquoise. And so I was fairly, yeah, I mean, I've just always had a great deal of cognitive intelligence. So I got straight A's through every class I ever took. And A's in math, A's in art, A's in history, A's in sociology, just the whole thing. I was valedictorian of my high school and gave the valedictory speech, and just all sorts of those things.
Could
But
I know, excuse me, could I know which is your IQ?
yeah, it's about 167.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Congratulations, that is for your mother, I mean.
Well,
Be-
I my dad's got a genius level IQ, and my
really?
mom, yeah, and my
Oh,
mom is also exceptionally intelligent.
oh,
Um,
wow.
they're both very good looking, which is like, I'm the ugly sheep of the family,
Well,
but they're both
don't
gorgeous.
ask me.
Well, my dad looks like Paul Newman, and or he did. He's deceased, and my
Really?
mom is deceased. As I said, I don't have any living family members.
Mhm.
And my mom is just absolutely gorgeous. She was one of 4 sisters, and they were all drop dead. It was like the McGuire sisters. I mean, they're just absolutely beautiful, every one of them.
Wow.
Um,
Mhm.
so, um, but once I wrote my first couple of books, I was becoming very clear that there were higher stages of development, and that if I was at turquoise then and had been at turquoise for some time, it was very likely that I had some degree of a third tier stage available. And so I went through several versions of what this third tier stage could look like. And there are a very small number of developmental models that will have at least one stage of third tier consciousness. And so I had at least some material that I could reference and would help me create these structure stages. Um,
Do you remember which ones did you use?
Well, the ones that I use now. So I would have, well, what I refer to as post integral or post turquoise. And when third tier structures occur, they often will occur as a part of some waking up experience, although they're not defined as that. They're defined as growing up structures. But when you generally get a strong mystical experience of first, third tier, it's often what I'd call a unity consciousness with Earth. So it's a mystical experience of the gross being one with the gross realm. And then the next stage, I would say it was a oneness with the subtle or dream state realm. And then the next stage was a oneness with the causal or deep dreamless, formless state. And then the highest was a non-dual condition, a oneness with non-dual. And they were given colors like violet, ultraviolet, and clear light, and so on. I've had Satori experiences that have pretty much run that spectrum. And I experienced the sort of highest of that spectrum about 10 years ago. And the earlier ones I experienced back 20, 30 years or so. But I knew what to look for because I was such an avid student of Zen. And I'm an avid student of virtually any mystical system anywhere. And I've learned an enormous amount from every one I've looked at, from Taoism to Hinduism, to Buddhism to Judaism, to Christianity, Catholic and Protestant, and all the mystics involved in all of them. And it was very important for me to actually come up with the names of waking up and growing up, because that waking up, it allowed me to differentiate between these states of consciousness and those structures. And there were so many models of the different structures that different developmentalists had recognized these stages of growing up. And all of them went from models that had like Maslow's 5 or 6 stages to Lovinger's 8 or 9 stages. And I'd always spent an enormous amount of time studying those models because they were so important to each of us and how we create our worldview. And not that many people have genuine mystical experiences of waking up. So it was important for me to be able to distinguish what I meant by third tier growing up from an experience of waking up, even though they often occurred simultaneously. But that's a sort of a brief summary of my vertical stages of growing up and the experiences that I have had of waking up.
That's beautiful. And it's lovely what you said, this last part, which is that they generally come together.
Yeah, I know, and I love that about,
I
and
love
it makes so much sense. It just
that
makes so
is
much
beautiful. Yeah, yeah, very, very nice.
good.
Well, thank you for this personal account that you
Yeah,
gave, because it's very interesting to see your personal inner development. No?
right.
And remember about maybe writing another one taste, follow
Yeah,
number
I'll
two.
certainly give it a thought now.
Volume 2, right? Okay.
Right.
So, what's your integral view and personal experience about veganism and its evolution, not only as a way of reducing the environmental impact, but above all, as a way of stopping the exploitation and suffering of animals at the macro farms and the extensive fishing? Would you say it is a temporary fashion? Is it a need we need to address? Are you a vegan? How would this matter be seen from the different quadrants? And how to integrate meat eaters and walk toward a greener world at the same time, which is not easy, right?
Yeah. I'm not really sure exactly how we would integrate meat eaters, the vegetarian, because by definition, to be a vegetarian means you're not being a meat eater. So you're not going to ever find a way to pull them together. I suppose the closest thing we could come to it is that there are many companies now, quite a few in America, big food companies, that are making meat substitute material based on plant material. So they're made out of soybeans or something, but they're definitely not meat. And you can get those in the form of hamburgers or steaks or any of those. And I personally spent a good deal of my life as a vegetarian. And I did so originally for Buddhist reasons.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Um, and I've been a pure vegetarian in that form since I was about 20 to 50 years old. And I just wouldn't eat any meat at all. Um, then I started sort of going back and forth between mostly soy products and occasional like chicken, something like that. Um, and I started going back to occasionally eating meat because I had an illness. It was called chronic fatigue immune deficiency syndrome. And it's a chronic illness, and I've had it for many years. And it essentially it exhausts your energy and you feel run down all the time. And I found that when I ate meat, that helped, at least a noticeable, fair amount. And that was important for me. But then I found that the chronic fatigue syndrome started to kind of go away and then come back and go away and come back, almost like when I was eating meat or eating vegetables. And so, but it wouldn't follow it perfectly. So it wasn't always when I ate meat, I would get the illness. It was sometimes when I ate meat, I would, and sometimes I wouldn't, and I'd just eat vegetables. But that's a kind of a complex story. But I hope you can get the sort of general flavor of it. Um, I would say if someone has asked me if I were a vegetarian, I'd probably reply mostly. and just leave it at that, because I mostly am a vegetarian, and mostly it's for religious reasons.
Mm-hmm. And
Uh,
therefore, what do you believe about these macro farms and these, like artificial fishing creation and
I
preparation
don't
of?
like them.
No,
I
not
think
really.
they sound just crude
Yeah,
and
yeah,
animal inducing suffering farms.
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, it's it's not
It's
nice at all, and really, it should be stopped in some way.
it's no
Precise.
way to treat a living thing.
Yeah.
It's just,
It's another part of our mad
yeah,
system,
yeah,
collective system.
right,
Absolutely.
right.
Anyway, um, Ken, I would love to know, and I am sure the people which listen and which follow you also would like to know, what are you writing right now, or what are you about to publish? Because I was the other day in a beautiful weekend with your translator, Spanish translator, David, Gonzalez Raga, which is your Spanish translator. And he said to tell you, let me see that I remember what he said. Because it was not namaste, it was ingashu.
Oh, thank,
Ingashu. Because he said, I want you to tell Ken a great recognition and a great depth of gratitude.
uh,
That's what Ingasho. That's what he told me to tell you.
that's wonderful. I've appreciated him very much. He's a terrific translator, and they've translated quite a few of my books into Spanish.
Yes, practically all of them
Yeah,
is translated by him. And I tell you something, Ken, because I know both languages, I can say he is so accurate and so
yeah,
exact that in
that's
many
great.
occasions I say, oh God, he's Ken Wilber in Spanish,
That's
because
great.
his soul, he's a great meditator, by the way, and therefore he knows Satori, and he
Right.
has these high levels of consciousness. Therefore, he can understand what you say,
Yeah,
and what are the following steps that he's expecting from you, because he
right.
told me, please ask him, as I want to know, and others too, what is he going to give me to translate, because the last book that he translated was the religion, the future of
Of
religion,
the religion of tomorrow.
the
Yeah.
religion of. So what are you writing to publish, please?
Okay. It's a book, I guess you would call it holism, about wholeness.
Pluralism.
I'm sorry?
Pluralism.
About wholeness, wholeness.
Yes. Oh,
Holistic, holistic,
holistic. Yeah, yeah.
or wholeness,
Wholeness. Yeah, yeah.
holism. And I point out that you could want to be yourself a wholeness or believe in the unity of everything. But you have to realize there are at least 5 different types of unities in this universe. And you can be completely whole in one way and not understand the wholeness in 4 other dimensions. And so, what you have to do is to understand each type of wholeness. And I'll show you how to do that in this book. And I'll give you some exercises you can do to cover each area of wholeness in this book. And we'll do that. We'll walk through all 5 of them. So when you finish this book, you'll have a perfectly good understanding of what unity or wholeness or holism means. And the 5 types of holism, in a sense, they respond to quadrants, levels, lines, states, and types. But I've come up with a different way of naming them that I started doing some time ago. And I like these names a lot. They're growing up, waking up, opening up, cleaning up, and showing up. And each one of those will produce a different type of wholeness. So imagine, for example, that it's 1,000 or 2,000 years ago, but it was a long time ago. It was not any modern era. But you were studying Zen Buddhism. And you were walking through the forest one day, and the sun is circling the earth, and the earth is stretched out, and you feel really good that, and you're walking through the woods, so you're seeing all these trees, and all of a sudden you have a satori, and you're one with the sun. You no longer see the sun, you no longer feel the earth, you're one with the earth. You no longer see the trees, you're one with the trees. But that sense of oneness, which seems to be a oneness with everything, you still think the earth is flat. And you'll still think that the sun circles the earth. And you won't know that experience won't tell you anything about the cells or atoms or molecules in every one of the trees. Those are different types of unity. And you can experience those, but they'll be different. And so we call the first experience an experience of waking up. And you have a waking up experience by studying a mystical religion, essentially. And so we go through that, including understanding eternity and infinity. And infinity means that you yourself are one with the infinite universe. So there isn't a different infinity on the other side of the earth. There's just infinity. And if you experience infinity right here, you've experienced infinity everywhere. And you experience it right here, right now, because you don't have a head.
Right.
And so I walk them through the headless.
We don't need it. We don't need it.
Right. And then you are one with the timeless now, because the past as past isn't real, and the future as future isn't real. So you can think of something from your past right now, just anything, just pick an image of something that you did yesterday or that happened in the past, and then go ahead and remember that clearly, and notice that the memory of that past is a present experience. It's something that you are experiencing right here and right now. And that's all you're ever actually experiencing, is this timeless now. And the same goes for the future. Think about anything that's going to happen in the future, and that is a present thought. And that present thought is occurring right here in this timeless now. So that old cliche, be here now, is exactly a correct summary of being one with infinity and one with eternity. So it proceeds along those lines. That explains waking up. And then growing up, I walk through a typical 6 or 7 stage of growing up model, like Jane Lovinger's or Piaget's. And I'll explain what first person development is. That's when you're a very young child and you can only experience your own first person experiences. And so if you take a child who's young, 1 or 2 years old, and you put a colored ball between the child and yourself, and that colored ball is colored green on one side and red on another side, and you spin it several times so the child can see both colors. And then you stop the ball with the red side facing the child and the green side facing yourself. And you ask the child, what color are you seeing? They'll correctly say red. And you say, okay, now what color am I seeing? And they'll say red. They have no idea that you have a different perspective, a second person perspective on the world. And then you can go on up to third person and even fourth person. Jane Levenger gives 7-person levels of growing up to the 7th person. So I walk people through that and I say, but notice that those are not stages of waking up. So you can be going through any first person or second person or add third person, but you won't be one with the entire universe. You won't have a waking up experience, not necessarily, but you are growing up, and you certainly want to do that. So I walk them through how they can recognize the different stages in themselves. And then in that arena of different structures of consciousness, psychologists recognize a multiple number of intelligences, as we talked about earlier. So I can have cognitive development, moral development, ego development, aesthetic development, spiritual development, and so on. And so I put, you can become one with each one of those. And that process I call opening up to all of your intelligences. So we have a waking up, we have a growing up, and we can open up in any number of these intelligences and grow up. The different lines always go to the same levels of growing up. And so that's a very important thing for them to understand. So that gives us growing up, waking up, opening up, and then cleaning up. I go ahead and go back to Freud because
better.
It's so interesting because Freud, most people know the terms ego and id from Freud.
Yes, but the one that developed it better was Jung.
That's right. But Jung was first a student of Freud.
Oh, yeah.
And entirely turned on to the notion of the unconscious because of Freud. And Jung writes very clearly about Freud and how much he meant to him. And incidentally, they broke up. They stopped talking at all over one argument where Freud was talking to Jung and he says, please tell me you won't give up the id theory, the libido theory. And Jung said, well, I was a little bit startled by that. And he said, why? And Freud said, because it protects us from the black tide of the black mud of mysticism.
Oh,
and
that's
Jung,
why I prefer Jung.
And Jung said, what Freud didn't realize is everything that he called the black mud of mysticism was everything I was interested in.
That's it. That's it.
Jung actually wrote that. And they never spoke again. They never said a single word to each other after that day. So but Jung started because he was attracted to Freud's work. But most people don't know that Freud never once used the term I or id. Those are Latin terms. And the I means one's first person, I-ness,
Self.
and, right? And it means third person unconscious material. And that's how Freud actually wrote it. He referred to the I and the it, using the actual pronouns that people use in day-to-day life. And so his most famous quote was, somebody asked him, what does this new psychoanalysis of yours do? And he said, where it was, their ego shall be. That's how it's translated, because his official translator thought that using those Latin terms, the ego and the id, would make him sound scientific, more scientific. What Freud actually said was, where it was, there I shall become. And that's a perfect example of what decent psychoanalysis does. Like Fritz Perls used to do, is he would, when somebody had a problem, he would sit them down in what he called the empty chair, which is a chair that was just empty in front of them. And he'd have them put their problem, their symptom, their neurosis in the empty chair and talk to it. Actually say, why are you bothering me? Why are you doing this to me? Why are you here? What can I do to make you go away? Or so on. And they would strictly have to use the terms the I and the it, because they would say, like, if they had a great deal of excitement and were repressing it, then it would show up as anxiety. And they would never say the anxiety I am causing. They would always say the anxiety, it is disturbing me.
Right.
Or whatever you're unaware of. You generally
I call it the character.
what?
I call it the character, that which we have learned to escape from, like the mask that
Right.
we use in the theater of life. So
Right.
I call it the character.
Yeah. Well, so that was it. So what Freud famously said is, where it was, there I shall become. And so what the person does, they go back and forth talking to this it from their position of being an I. And very soon, if you're talking like you are the it, then you will say, the excitement I am experiencing, and that is causing me anxiety. And so as they go back and forth, they start to re-identify with the repressed it. Mm-hmm. And so that it becomes an I. It actually becomes reassociated with them. And so where it was, I have become. And that's what Freud was trying to do. And the first time I read that he had never, ever specifically used the term ego or id. It was always the I or the it. And he would write that. He would write, the I often suffers from things that it does. He would write it just like that. And I was just so blown away by that. It was just so impressive. And Fritz Perls, of course, just made it almost paradigmatic. So that's, in a sense, what
you are writing about.
Cleaning up does. Takes any it that you have shoved into your unconscious, and it brings it back and reunites you with it to form a more whole psyche, or more perfect I or self.
Wasn't it what you previously were calling the work with the shadow?
Yeah. I got into shadow work in a really big way through the work of Fritz Perls. And Fritz Perls was, at the time that he became famous, and he became very famous, was at Esalen Institute.
Yeah.
And you've probably heard of Esalen. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Esalen was actually founded by my very good friend, Michael Murphy. And Murphy was left this beautiful property by his family, and he turned it into this growth center called Esalen, which was the first major growth center in America in the 60s. And by the 80s, there were over 300 growth centers in America, all copied off of Esalen.
Wow.
So that was like wild. But Fritz Perls was one of the big stars there on doing client-centered therapy. And he famously said, I can cure any neurosis in 15 minutes. I know. And the funny thing was, even his critics tended to agree with him. Perls was simply a genius at working with the I and the it. And he would take somebody that and said, what's your problem? And they say, well, I have depression, or I'm anxious, or I'm obsessive compulsive, or I'm overeating, or something like that. And he would say, okay, take that and put that in that empty chair. And then he would have them talk, go back and forth. And even people in the audience could see that when the person was talking about this they were actually talking as if it were them, because Perls would make them say I and then talk to the it. And so within 10 or 15 minutes, they would be re-identified with this it. And and everybody could see it. I mean, it was just obvious as hell what was going on. And so when I started reading those transcripts from those sessions at Esalen, I got Perls's books and read all of them. And that was really quite early in my life. And it sort of opened me up to the whole psychoanalysis aspect and the whole, whether Freudian or Jungian or Adler or Otto Rank or any of those. And so that was the summary of all of those. In essence, is what I call cleaning up.
Shadow work.
Shadow work, yeah.
Yeah.
And the last one is showing up. And showing up means using all four quadrants and recognizing how each of those is a different whole. And you can have a whole psyche, or a whole external environment, or a whole society, a whole culture. And there are important unities to be found in all of those. But notice that you can reunite with your shadow, but that won't give you a waking up experience. It won't make you grow up. It certainly won't help you show up, and so on. So by the time we've gone through the book, I've taken them through 5 areas of genuine unity, a genuine wholeness. And so to the extent that they've followed it and done all the exercises and stuff, they themselves will walk away with that kind of new unity.
To finally tell them, come on, show up.
Right.
Come on.
The book is called Making Room for Everything.
Oh, wow. Fabulous. Fabulous. Making room for everything. That's fabulous. Because it is precisely giving the second, I probably know that you have done it with that idea, because you are opening the space precisely. Right. So right. That is beautiful. It's like the opening is absolutely needed to then be able to show up.
Right. And to wake up and to clean up.
Every other one,
And
for
you
sure.
want all of those to be
For
included if you're a true holist. If you're
Absolutely.
truly
No, but
one
I,
with
I
everything.
understand that, but I was meaning now in a semantic way of the word opening, in
Right,
the sense that, right now the problem I find in society is that people is closed,
right.
like a shell. You see,
Yeah,
they don't want to relate. It's like, there is a lot of closeness in many things, closeness in relationship,
yeah,
closeness in belief in something,
yeah,
closeness in experiencing, closeness in having curiosity
right.
about things, so I find a lot of closeness. So I was using it in the semantic way of opening, which will
That's
give
fine.
then the entrance to all the other five
Right,
experience, all
right.
the other five wholenesses. So it is wonderful to talk to you as always, Ken. I thank you very, very much for your presence, for your existence, and for all that you have given us and continue giving us. When do you think this book will be published?
Probably it usually takes Shambhala about 6 months.
Oh,
So
still.
it'll be about 6 months probably.
Oh, okay. We'll wait then.
Yeah.
Okay. Meanwhile, we will keep on deepening on this religion of the future, which is
Right.
very, very enlightening.
Right.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you,
Well,
Ken. That was beautiful.
bye.
Much love to you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.